Hi, thank you so much for joining us. We've been working on a joint project together at Austin Pets Alive, and Maddie's Fund has been kind enough to give us a grant to try to figure out better ways to save big dogs, and especially dogs with challenges. So I'm really excited to be presenting. It's very new, so we're just getting started with the grant and the work, and we're really excited to have Dr. Segurson on our team.
So talking about my favorite topic in the world, which is big dogs. And I'm going to start by talking about our history. We've been talking a lot about the past and where we've been and where we're going to. But this presentation is about where we're going to, but we can't get anywhere without thinking about where we've come from. These are two dogs that I worked with in the past. They're two different dogs, even though they look very similar. The dog on the left is Gwen Stefani. She was a more challenging dog. She had a bite history after adoption and got returned. I'll be talking about her more later if we have time. But I'm going to start by talking about a dog named Virgil. And Virgil was a dog that I knew and loved about 10 years ago now. And he was a black dog in our shelter that had a certain physical appearance that made it very challenging for us to find a home for him. This was in Boston, and they had a muzzle law for pit bull type dogs at the time. And Virgil stayed in our shelter because we didn't have all the programs in place that some of you are going to learn about today to help him. He stayed in our shelter for a very long time, and he deteriorated. He came in a dog who was just a regular dog, but as over time he deteriorated, he developed some aggression issues towards other dogs, and then he became even more stressed and deteriorated to the point that while I was on maternity leave, Virgil was euthanized. And I have a picture of Virgil on my wall, and he's a reminder to me that this is why we're here today. This is why we're all doing what we're doing, so that in the future there's less and less Virgils. So wanted to introduce with that, and also just get a show of hands from those of you in the audience. How many of you have a special Virgil in your history that you wished you could save but you didn't? Pretty much all of us. I think every single one. So welcome. We don't have all the answers. Austin Pets Alive is doing so much, and they've learned so much, and we're going to share everything that we can. But a big part of what we're talking about today is us joining together to find these solutions for big dogs and present some ideas to you that we hope you're going to join us on the journey.
And I thought I would also share an example of Bongo, a dog named Bongo that was one of my foster dogs. He came from San Antonio. I was trying to help San Antonio raise their live release rate, and one of the ways that I could do that, because I have a house full of dogs, is take dog-friendly dogs that were large and were losing their life for no behavioral reason. And so I would work with the Claire, who was the live release manager down there, and she would text me dogs that she thought could fit into my household. And so she said, hey, this guy, I looked at my texts before this presentation, and she said, hey, this guy is super calm and seems good with other dogs. Do you think you can take him, because he only has 10 minutes left? And so I know, where are you? I knew it. Out of like 40, this is the one that caused the most problems. But anyway, he was fine with me. Everything was great. And then he went to his first home, and then he developed severe separation anxiety. And so he was returned. He went to a trainer in the area who said, this dog is too much for you. You need to return him to the shelter. And so the people brought him back. They were very tearful. They had been trying. And he's so cute, he got adopted like 5 more times, and each time he got returned because separation anxiety was escalating until he just could not, he's just out of his mind with anxiety. The good news is we finally did find an adopter for him that has pretty much changed their entire life. He has the worst separation anxiety of any dog I've ever known, and for some reason I know a lot of dogs with separation anxiety. And when did he get adopted? You did some research, like 2016?
Yeah, late 2016.
And so he still is difficult for that adopter to handle. She can't leave him alone. They have to find a pet sitter. They have to take him with them. She's able to do 2-hour breaks at a time, and that's it. But they love him, and they're 100% committed to him, and they feel like he's changed their life. So it's another example of really challenging animals have people out there. It's just a matter of finding them. But also, I mean, well, that's the whole point of our talk, is help to find those people.
Yeah, and so we're able to save more and more Bongos and more Virgils these days, but it's really tough, right? And sometimes the effort it takes to save Bongo, we have a really hard time saving Virgil because we have limited resources. And that's why we're here today. We're going to be sharing lots of information. We're not going to be able to go into a lot of detail about some of that, but please come up to us and if you have questions about specific things later. These are some pictures of Bongo.
And his mom.
Mom.
He's Velcroed to her side.
And he's a therapy dog. So the big picture, we are going to be focusing on the in-shelter piece, but really important to mention that it's not just the shelter piece. Our communities are vitally important in our success, and without our communities, we can't be successful. And then our cultures are also so important. It's so interesting to me that the city of Austin has such an amazing community of people and adopters who are willing to accept perfectly imperfect dogs. And is it because there's something special about Austin? Yes, but that special thing is that Dr. Jefferson and others in this community have worked really, really hard to build that culture of people who understand that dogs are dogs and they're not perfect. And so, yes, it's happening here in Austin, but that culture is important and you can do it too. So we're going to be talking about the in-shelter piece, and specifically one part mostly about that in-shelter piece, and that's the management of pets in our care from when they come into the shelter to when they leave. So we're going to be talking about some things that we're not even piloting yet. These are things that are ideas and we're discussing and we're getting started with them because this is about the horizon. It's not about what we're doing now. And our hope is that as we're developing these things at Austin Pets Alive, many of you in this room are going to join with us and develop things at your organization, and we can all learn from each other in terms of what works. So care pathways. We're looking at care pathways for these dogs. How many of you have heard of the term care pathways as it refers to human medicine? A couple of you, primarily people I know. So care pathways in human medicine are planned pathways for population. So there are care pathways for diabetics that are built upon best practices in terms of how best to manage a particular condition and disease. And they're best practices to manage that population of people through all phases of that disease. And using care pathways results in better outcomes for patients as well as better quality of life. So that sounds great, right? And I think that's something that we really need to be thinking about in the midst of saving Virgil and saving Bongo. We need to also be thinking about that big picture and what can we do to make ourselves more efficient. And so care pathways are certainly one way to do that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about them. So they're management guidelines that can be applied to a group of patients, care pathways. So in human medicine, they can provide guidance on the things you see there. And whereas when we're talking about shelter care, they can provide guidance on very similar things, but instead of lifestyle, we're talking about care in shelters, but talking about things, when to intervene, when to change our plan, how to follow up with them in the home. All the different factors of care pathways in human medicine can be applied for our shelters, and I hope that a lot of us start doing it. This might be a little bit small, but when we talk about care pathways in human medicine, this is a care pathway and there's a link down below, which might be hard to copy, but you can search up care pathways and find a ton of information about it. But you can see there's a continuum, and for this particular disease, which is a chronic disease with diabetes, you can see that in the early stages you start healthy, and you can see the arrows go both ways. They can start to progress towards disease, but you can turn around and go back. But once you get to the point of actually having a disease, it's much more difficult to turn back, and often there's no turning back, and you progress until end of life. And I think it's really interesting to think about that related to shelters, because do we get to a point with some of these dogs where we can't go back? My hope is that the answer to that is no, and some of the work we're doing is suggesting to us that we're not getting to a place where we can't go back with most of our dogs. But I think really interesting to think about that continuum and how dogs are progressing over time. And when we develop care pathways, you could see the different stages of the disease. You can also see in this slide, it offers 3 different areas of disease progression for this patient or for this group of patients. And you can see that in early stages, in the human system, they often rely on self-management, and there's more input and involvement from medical teams as the disease progresses. And I think that's important because from a shelter standpoint, I would hope that there's a lot of work that's going into our basic programs. That's where we're devoting a lot of our time in terms of staff time. But those are programs that kind of run themselves. And in terms of investing large amount of times on individual animals, if we have these pathways in place, we have more time to do that. And this is just an example. I'm going to jump through this one, but of care pathways, oftentimes they're based on flow charts, and flow charts that have all different details in terms of guiding physicians through different problems to make sure they're being thorough. So that's care pathways. Care pathways are for a population. Care plans are for individuals. So pathways help us in general. The plans help the individual, because a pathway is not going to be perfect for every single individual. Our care plans help us to individualize our what we do for the animals that need a little bit more care and input. So the care pathways and care plans. We're going to spend the rest of the time talking about the care pathway system, and begins with developing a care pathway system to help dogs. So developing it is where to start. Gonna be sharing lots of examples and ideas with you. How care pathways work at Austin Pets Alive might not be how you develop a care pathway for your organization, but our goal here is to throw out lots of ideas. And so there's lots of different ways that we can develop a pathway plan system. It could be based on a basic intake assessment, assessing the dog's needs at the time of intake and start plans from there. It could be based or changed based on behavior we observe in the shelter. It might be related to previous information. So deciding how we're going to develop our plan, and we might have deciding how we're going to develop our pathways, and we might have different pathways for different conditions, as well as something like an intake assessment. We're going to be talking about intake assessment related pathways. But before we go there, we're going to give you some examples of, Dr. Jefferson is actually going to give you some examples of different levels. So we're going to be talking about an intake assessment that helps us to divide our dogs into 3 different groups. And those 3 different groups have 3 different set of needs that are not different, 3 levels of set of needs. So level 2 dog gets all the level 1 stuff, but they also get more. Right.
So what we're trying to, and I think Dr. Segurson said this pretty well, but just in case you missed it, what we're trying to do is prevent dogs from falling through the cracks. Who feels like they have too many dogs in their care to keep track of them well and make sure they're moving through well? Okay, yeah, me too. Okay, good. That helps a lot. So this is a way for us to hopefully apply something to everybody right from the beginning, so that their trajectory out of the shelter and out of our care is moving quickly, no matter the volume and the complexity of the dogs that you have. So level 1 dogs, obviously we need to do the very basics with food, water, adequate care, adequate shelter, make sure that they're not too hot, too cold, basic medical care. And you'll notice that does not say physical exam, it just says basic medical care. Our intention is to make sure that they're getting the basics, really the basics. These dogs just need to get kind of taken care of in your shelter and moving forward. We're not trying to do a lot for level 1 dogs unless they need it. Because we've got a huge mass of dogs. We have 200 plus dogs on campus, and then another 300 dogs in foster at a time. So we've got a huge number of dogs that we're trying to move through our system. We want to give them the ability to hide or retreat, that fight or flight reflex. We want them to have the right temperatures and get hopefully light and dark. That's something that's actually difficult for us in our shelter because the lights are on automatic circuits. Being able to groom themselves and, of course, remove mats or anything that they might have so that they're not uncomfortable, and then giving them a place to sleep that it's not the hard concrete. So really basic level 1 care for them.
And just one comment about the light-dark cycle. So light-dark cycle helps us to maintain our circadian rhythms. And the more research we do about shelter dogs, we're learning that one of the things that challenges them and stresses them out the most is the lack of the ability to sleep or rest. And so providing them with appropriate light and dark cycles is one thing we can do to help them to rest as much as possible.
And we didn't put it on here, and I don't know, probably most of you follow Kristen Auerbach's social media, but they were doing an experiment with somebody staying in the kennels, and she couldn't sleep until they started. Actually, the dogs were awake all night barking, and when they turned on music, I can't remember which type they ended up doing.
I can't remember either.
I think it was a combination of white noise and really like soft jazz type music, and all the dogs slept when that was on. So it's really interesting to think about from that kind of ambient noise too. Okay, moving on. So for level 1, we also want to have things that we're doing for them, including giving them enrichment. And we won't probably have enough time to go into what our program is for enrichment, but I can see a whole bunch of people on our team back there, and we are hoping to get resources on our website for you guys to be able to grab how to create a volunteer program to get enrichment Kongs, something to them every day for 200 plus dogs, and making sure that they have a photo and bio on the website. Welfare assessment. Do you want to explain the welfare assessment?
Yeah, so this welfare assessment is really important because most of our dogs are going to start hopefully as level 1 dogs, which are kind of the less effort type of dog, but assessing their welfare is really important because a dog who is highly stressed in the shelter is likely going to jump right from a level 1 to a level 2 because of the added level of care, and assessing their welfare regularly so that we can meet their needs is super important. And it can be as simple as daily rounds, just walking by their kennels to see how they're doing.
And then we do 2 times a day out of the kennel. I know that's not possible for every shelter. We'd like ours to be 3 times a day out of the kennel, but I think the important piece about that is that you set a goal for your baseline. This is your baseline care that every dog in your shelter should get. And so for us, that's twice a day out of the kennel, either going on walks or play groups. Potty breaks, doesn't even have to be walks. It'd be nice if it was 2 times a day, full walks. And then having a little bit of time with people. You can accomplish some of the time with people by going on the walks and play group, but it would be ideal, obviously, if they could have a little bit of time to just be pet and cared for, kind of have that human connection. And then the welfare evaluation.
Yeah,
Sorry,
that's really important because we have it on there twice.
Okay. And then level 2. So you have your level 1, level 2 dogs get everything in level 1. Every dog in your care gets level 1. The level 2 dogs would get a training plan, basic training. So it's not this dog has this problem and we're going to fix it doing this. It's just trying to help them be a good dog and market themselves to adopters by sitting and not jumping all over and acting crazy. when they're on the leash. Virtual Foster is another program that we're trying to do to help the dogs have an advocate that is assigned to them, and that's a program that we can share the details with you if we have time, but if not, then we can share the meat of it later online. CGC Canine Good Citizen program and Top Dog, those are two programs that are really connected. The Canine Good Citizen program is a AKC program trying to help dogs, not help dogs, is trying to help people through dogs, but we're using it because we did a study with Best Friends a long time ago where the dogs we put 60 dogs that were blocky-headed adult short-haired dogs in that program and 60 that were not, and that looked exactly the same sort of type. And the ones that went through the program got adopted 140 days faster than the other ones. And so that was not including marketing. We don't know if it's a combination of them just being seen more often because they're getting worked with more, or if it really was because they're behaving better, or if it's the signage on their cage that says they're in that program. But something helped those dogs get out of our shelter faster. So I think it's one that's well worth looking into. And then the Top Dog program is because Canine Good Citizen is very specific for dogs that can jump through a few hoops to be eligible. Top Dog makes more of our dogs eligible and basically gives them the same and adds actually some criteria for their training. The matchmaker summary, those are our sort of elite adoption counselors, if you will, and our plan with that is to help them have a synopsis of the dog. If we have more complicated dogs, they need to know a little bit more, but when you're looking at 200 dogs, it's really difficult to distill that down, especially if you've got notes, pages and pages and pages of notes. So the matchmakers have a summary for each dog that they can relay quickly to an adopter and help that adopter see who that dog is and hopefully fall in love with them.
And those summaries aren't just used by matchmakers. If I want to have a conversation about a dog that I haven't met and don't know, I always go to the matchmaker summary first because it gives me a really good overview and shows me where I might need to dive in deeper. So it's useful not just for the matchmakers, but for everybody.
Yep. And then a care plan if needed. So that's where if a dog has something that we do need to work on to make them adoptable, but not necessarily a high level problem or challenge, then we can add that into the level 2. Anything else you want to add?
Just reevaluation. So whether they're a level 1, a level 2, or a level 3, that we're always reevaluating them to see whether they're still on the right path or whether we might need to shift them to a different one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then level 3. So these dogs will have their care plan, and it will include all levels of the behavior modification plan, really identifying what they need to become adoptable. So if you think of a medical animal needing a treatment before getting adopted, we're sort of applying that same logic here, that if they can have this treatment, if you will, then they become more adoptable. Continuing on with the Canine Good Citizen Top Dogs, life skills for long stays. Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, the Life Skills for Long Stays class is a new program that seems to be helping a lot of the more challenging dogs at Austin and Pets Alive, and it is exactly what it says in that it works on working with dogs on specific tasks like training them to go into a kennel when we ask them to, or go to a place that will, and muzzle training them that will help integrate them into a home easier and help them live a happy life with happy people.
And then the flow coordinator, you should definitely explain that, and I know ours is here.
Yes, flow coordinator in the back. We have a flow coordinator and our flow manager. So flow coordinator is a new program since the grant started, and it's all about, and related to all that we're talking about today, is managing a dog's flow through the shelter. So making sure that all those dogs have their bios and dogs are getting their needs met. So you can think of our flow coordinators and our flow managers as the people that are making sure all this is happening for the dogs that they're in charge of.
And then pre-adoption counseling, if you have a dog with a care plan, then you want to be able to pass that on and make sure the dog doesn't go and fail. So like in Bongo's case, if we had just sent him out again with no medication and no tips on how to handle separation anxiety, severe separation anxiety, then that person would have just failed. The next person fails, and then the next person fails, and it all gets counted against the dog. And so the more we can do to prepare an adopter or a foster for taking a dog home, the better off that dog is going to be. And is that it? Oh,
That's
sorry,
it.
I went back.
Yeah, so...
Well, there was transition plan, but I guess that's
yeah,
the same,
sorry.
actually.
Okay. So that's a lot, right? How many of you find that to be pretty overwhelming? It's a lot. Austin Pets Alive has done a lot to help the dogs in their care. And many of us are probably not there yet. And that's why American Pets Alive is so amazing, and that there's Maddie's Lifesaving apprenticeships and a lot of other opportunities for you to come to Austin Pets Alive to learn about some of these programs so that you can implement them at your organization. And you can't do everything at once. You need to pick where you're going to start with all this, and at the foundation of it really should be having these pathway plans so that everybody's being moved through as efficiently as possible to a positive outcome. So now we're going to talk about using this care pathway system, so steps to manage our population and use this system to get the dogs out. So it starts pretty simple, getting an inventory list of your dogs. So this is just a shelter love report. An inventory list of our dogs, and we have their time in custody over there so we can see who our population is. And for each dog in our care, we want to identify a care pathway for each of them and any new dogs that are coming into the system. So the care pathways that we talked about for level 1, level 2, level 3. And how we're suggesting that we're going to do this at Austin Pets Alive and encourage you to start thinking about how you're going to do this is via an intake assessment. This is something that is in development, so please don't take this and say it's science and validated and all that stuff. This is a concept and idea at this point, and it's really, really important to say that we are not using this for euthanasia decisions. We are using this to help us decide how to care for the dogs. And so talking about doing a basic intake assessment within 24 hours of intake. Is Katie in the room? Nope, good, because this is probably going to be her job and she does not know it yet, so I didn't want to surprise her. But doing a basic intake assessment within 24 hours, looking at specific factors related to the dogs that help us put them on a path. So they get a score for things. These scores are not their fault. A dog cannot help if it's small or large. A dog is scored higher because they are a breed restricted breed. That is not because we think they're bad dogs. It is because they tend to be more challenging to place in homes, but it has nothing to do with the dogs themselves. It's just helping us to allocate our resources. So this is an example of the type of assessment we're looking at doing at Austin Pets Alive based on our population. Your assessment might be similar, it might be very, very different. And this is an example of a care pathway assessment. So our intake assessment to decide whether the dogs are going to be level 1, level 2, or level 3. So you can see we have, oh, I thought I had my mouse working, but I don't. You can see we have on the left there, we have our dog names. We have our different categories that I showed you on the last slide. And so dogs are getting scores for different items, and then you can see on the far right, they get a total score. And for this system, we're hypothesizing that dogs that are score between 0 and 4 go to level 1 pathway plan, which is the basic. Dogs that score between 5 and 9 go to level 2. And dogs that score 10 or higher are put into level 3. That's how we're talking about potentially doing it. And I would love to have some of us enter our own dogs, but I'm not certain that we're going to have time to do that. So I think we're going to move on for right now, and if there's time at the end, we can do that. Because I think it might be fun to have 1 or 2 of us see how our own dogs score and what kind of pathway plan they would be on. So decide what pathway they're going to be on and put them on that pathway. and then developing a care plan for level 3 dogs or any dogs we identify as at risk. So the care plan, remember, is our individual plan. So our level 1 and our level 2 dogs are, for the most part, unless identified as at risk, going to get kind of the standard plan. And our level 3 dogs are the dogs we're going to invest more resources into that really individualized care, making sure we're always paying attention to the level 1s and 2s and reevaluating. Does that make sense? All right. So this is a sample care plan for one of my very favorite dogs. I have a hard time talking about her without crying because I love her so much. This is Olympia. Olympia would be a level 3 care pathway. Olympia, and so an example of a plan for her, Olympia has significant thunderstorm issues. There's a lot of anxiety related to that. And she has escaped from her house related to thunderstorms. So we can have plans related to intake category or pathways related to intake assessment, but we can also have specific pathways for specific conditions, right? So over time, we don't have it yet, but hope to have a stranger danger pathway because yes, Olympia is scared of people she doesn't know. And having these pathways for things, so there's a standardized go-to, this is what we do with these dogs. We start them on that plan and keep them on that plan or keep them on that pathway until we see that it's not working and we need to reassess. Does that make sense? Awesome. And so Olympia also has some skin condition, so part of her plan is skin biopsies, and then her plan also includes what we're going to do with her. So because some of our dogs require more support as they go into homes, she gets some pre-adopt appointments, and a dog may get 0 pre-adopt appointments to meet their new people. A dog may have 5 pre-adopt appointments, so that's an individualized piece for her. And then providing a high level of post-adoption support to make sure that everything's going well for her. So that's an example of a level 3 dog who would have a very specific care plan that allows us to really ensure we're meeting her needs.
So we know this is overwhelming, and I think that's the problem, is that when we start saving more difficult animals, we get overwhelmed, and it decreases our ability to actually save and help those animals. So what we're really advocating for is understanding your resources, trying to understand your resources, what you can offer every dog in your care, and then adding a little bit on for the next group and the next group, so that you are not trying to give all of the dogs the top level, because then you can't save very many, because you're going to be, your resources are going to be expended on a few, but also having a stair-step level so that you're putting your resources where they're really needed. So this is difficult to try to figure out, but you're trying to understand how your basic level plan, how much time does that take? How many hours in the day does it take to walk the dog twice a day? How many hours, how much time is it going to take for them to get their photo and their bio done? Trying to really kind of a lot of time value to each dog, and understanding what each of those pieces in each level is going to cost you in resources. And most of our resources, probably for you and for us, is time. It's people. We spend over 80% of our budget on people, and then trying to allocate that appropriately. So we don't tend to take a very mathematical approach to dog care, but I think it's really important to try to do that so that you can really understand where your boundaries are. And I think that's something we've struggled with, is we take in a lot of really challenging dogs, and it's hard for us to quantify exactly how much time we need to spend on each difficult dog. And so sometimes they fall through the cracks, and more times than I want them to, and that means they're in our care longer without having that plan to leave. So resources, I can't overemphasize resources enough.
And one other thing to mention about that, and one of the reasons that I really admire Dr. Jefferson, is the attitude around resources, because I come from a history where when we didn't have resources, we tried, but at a certain point we gave up. And she never gives up, and that's the mentality that we need to have, is never give up unless we have a situation where clearly this animal cannot live a happy life or is very, very unsafe in the community. but pivoting if necessary. So her solution is, we don't have that resource. She's not sad about it. She figures out how we're gonna get those resources, and it's almost always the amazing Austin Pets Alive volunteers.
Yeah, resources, there's different levers to pull. So you can go ask for more money to get like a position. When we did the Best Friends CGC grant, that was to fund a position to do the CGC work. You can go and ask for money. So understanding what you need to get it done means that you can quantify it for somebody who can actually help you. Same for your volunteers. If you can say, I need to have 10 people that can do this job of walking or playgroup running, spell out the job description and put it out there and see if you can get people to come and help you do that job. The other thing I would just add to resources is there's always the toggle of decreasing resources somewhere else. So you can increase your resources by asking, but you also need to understand where you're wasting time and what's not effective so that you can remove that, try to remove that, and add something that's more effective. It's hard. We're not the best at it, but it's something that we need to be always mindful of because resources are definitely not in as high supply as we'd like. You?
All right, yes, this one can be me. So this is the part of keeping everything together and making sure that our dogs are not falling through the cracks, because we can put them on pathways, but unless we're following up, how do we know that they're getting what they need done? So this is where our flow management system really comes into play, and our flow coordinators come into play, is using a system to track activities to make sure that everything's happening. And we're not going to share the actual flow management log that is used at Austin Pets Alive because you would probably be really, really overwhelmed by the number of items that are in here. This is an example of a tracking system. We use Google Sheets for it, a tracking system to make sure dogs are getting what needs are met. So one of those needs might be checking to make sure that they have a bio updated. And so we have due dates associated with all these items, and our flow manager is responsible for going in and making sure when something is overdue, talking to so we have the flow manager who oversees and the flow coordinators who work with individual dogs. Our flow manager then can talk to whoever is the flow coordinator saying, oh, this dog's bio hasn't been updated, did you forget about it? To make sure that dogs are getting their needs met. Does that make sense? Great.
And I maybe go back to that last one. This is something we're trying to do organization-wide for creating sustainability and trying to really keep our programs more organized. And this is obviously, it'll apply to the big dogs. And I think because dogs fall through the cracks and they languish in our care, I mean, I hate to say that, but that does happen sometimes. And what we need to do is not only have the flow management system so we know what they should be getting, but then somebody has to actually make sure it's happening. And so that's what the flow manager is for. And our idea is that they go in and each of these dogs has a person associated with them, and as something becomes overdue, then they can turn one of these colors to a red or orange if it's slightly overdue, so that at a glance you can look and see where you are in the whole system of all 200 dogs. Where are we? Do we have 50 that are red, or do we have 2 that are red? How far off the mark are we? And then that needs to go up another layer, another level to a manager above that. And so what we've been trying to set up for our own systems is that there's calendar reminders when something's due, so that the manager above, probably everybody in this room has this problem, I'm assuming, because it seems like this is an entrenched problem in our industry, is that we want things to get done. Everybody agrees that it's going to get done, and then it just disappears. And nobody knows what happened to it, and 6 months later, you're like, what happened to, I thought we were doing this, and it's like, oh no, that went away a long time ago. And so having some sort of system of follow-up so everybody can stay on the same page without actually having to witness all the work themselves. So we have this in place, and then the manager above this person should be able to have a calendar reminder that lets them know they should be expecting an email from the flow manager saying 99% of the dogs are in compliance. So something really, really basic. It doesn't have to be the whole report, but just something that says we're up to date. And if we're not up to date, then what's going on and what's the plan to fix it? but there has to be that sort of looking downward, somebody expecting something from up above and somebody expecting to send something up, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and so that piece in terms of reporting to be really tracking what percentage of your dogs are getting, the level 1 dogs are getting their needs met, is a really important piece. And no one's going to be at 100% on everything to start with. We certainly aren't. But we're working towards that, and the key is that we're identifying where our challenged areas are so that we can develop solutions to them. So this is all about ensuring that our dogs are getting their needs met, using a holistic approach, thinking about the whole dog, and using a programmatic approach in terms of really looking at the individual pieces for each dog, and so that we can be approaching things more from a data standpoint to really focus on things. Using advocates, so one of the huge advantages of something like a flow coordination system are advocates, and that one of the things that I have found to be most important for imperfect dogs is having someone who loves them and cares about them and is their advocate to help them on their journey. It makes all the difference, and the flow coordination system allows for that. And then, just like we already talked about, ensuring they're getting their needs met from having these regular check-ins through the form of things like daily rounds, but also through things like flow manager checking in with the flow coordinators to see if they need help with anything.
And this is an example of what I was talking about with the reporting up. I kind of jumped the gun. So just having something that you can send upward and that they're expecting it so they know to look for it. So if it doesn't show up, they can ask where it is. And then you have that's checks and balances for your programming.
And not forgetting that some of our dogs are not safe to place in the community, and that's a small percentage of dogs, but some of them aren't. And so having also a process like a life-saving protocol, or some people call it euthanasia protocol, to make sure that we're doing everything that we can for our dogs. And this is something that should be evolving over time, because when you first start developing this type, how many of you use a euthanasia protocol or life-saving protocol? A couple of you. So this is a structured plan to make sure we're doing what we need to try to save this dog's life. So it involves things like calling previous owners before we make a euthanasia decision, calling everybody we can, investigating things like Kristen has talked about over the course of this, to find out whether this incident was really a serious incident or whether there's a reason behind it that this dog could safely be placed in a home. So having a standardized protocol that you go through and a group of people that is meeting together to discuss things when we're making decisions about these dogs, so we can be giving dogs, even when we have to make those tough decisions, giving the dogs the respect that they deserve and giving them the time to make sure that we're really being thoughtful about things and doing everything we can. So your protocol might start off being pretty basic, and there are resources about this online. Kristen did a great webcast for Maddie's Fund about a couple months ago. So if you go to maddiesfund.org and search Life-Saving Protocol, you'll be able to see her webcast about it. And start basic, but over time we're working on evolving the process for our dogs at Austin Pets Alive, so that we can really, really be confident about things. Or as confident as we can. I'm never going to stop learning, and I'll probably never going to be 100% confident about things, because dogs are dogs. So now we're going to end with our challenge to you all. I know this is a lot. I know it's a lot to think about, but I hope we put some ideas in your head in terms of, this seems interesting and this seems like it might be a good route for us to go so that we're better managing our population overall. But where will you start? How many of you think this sounds like something you might want to try? Great, that's awesome. So one of the first steps is thinking about where you're going to start. So what are you going to start with? You might just want to tackle the virtual foster piece, which isn't even the care pathways that we talked about, but you might want to start on just one little piece of everything, or you might want to start on pathway planning for your dog. So think for your entire population. So think about where you want to start, how you're going to start it, Do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think really easy places to start. All the softwares have programs where you can run a report that shows you how many dogs in your care don't have a bio or don't have a photo. So that would be a really simple place to start to see your gaps, find your gaps right away and try to fill those in, and maybe that's part of your weekly reporting. Another one you can do is look for the number of dogs on hold and make sure they're not slipping through the cracks on hold, meaning they're invisible to the public that's coming to your website, and also your animals marked unavailable. All of those things require somebody to do something, and when you're juggling a ton of dogs, it's really easy to forget to go back to the one unless you have a report to keep you kind of on track.
And that's really a flow management piece, and that may be where you just, that's where we started. You already had all the
sort of.
details of what you're providing in terms of in-shelter support, but for this project, we started with the flow management system because that made sense to us, and now we're adding on this care pathway concept. And they're worth it. This is the dog I showed at the beginning. This is Gwen Stefani again. And so Gwen was a dog who, she was ball obsessed. So obsessed with her ball that she wanted nothing else in the shelter. She was a long stay dog. And when you tried to interact with her, she displayed aggression towards us when she had that ball. And so she was a much more challenging dog for us at the time. I brought her into my home and she didn't care about the ball. Once she was out of that stressful environment, she didn't care about the ball at all. And so she went from this dog that we thought had to be a working dog because she was so obsessed with balls to a dog who didn't care about them. So we adopted her out, found a home for her pretty quickly after that. But she went to an environment that I could make a big long story about her, but I'm trying to keep this quick. That was not ideal, and there was a man in the house who was very loud, and he scared her just because of her loudness, and she ended up aggressing towards him. And so she came back again, and we reassessed her and put her back in foster care and found a home for her with this lovely woman who has had her, Gwen, for about 5 years now, and she's a happy, healthy dog and has had no aggression whatsoever in her home environment. And so this is tough, it's really tough, right? But developing these systems so that they're not falling through the cracks and we're able to help the Gwen Stefanis of the world is why we're here. So we'd love for you to join us, and if you check the Whova app, in this session description there's a document in there, so go to the agenda and the session description for this presentation. There's a document in there. If you open up that document, there is a link for you to sign up to join us. We're hoping to create, we're really excited about all the interest from all of you, and we're hoping to create a group that can band together and share ideas and hopefully do a little less work as we develop these things. We encourage you to join. How many of you are on Maddie's Pet Forum? Great. Join a Maddie's Pet Forum group that we've created for this topic so we can share ideas, share documents, things like that in the forum. So some of the things we talked about today will be there. And join the group, let us know how you're going to start. Think about what you want to start with. And we'll be meeting and talking about things and all working through this together to help save lives. What do you want to end with?
I think that's it. We're really excited about this. And, I think this just goes back to this broken foundation idea of how this is only now being discussed in 2020. And we've been dealing with huge volumes of dogs for the last 100 years coming into shelters. So I think it feels demoralizing to have dogs that you don't feel like you're giving everything you want to, but I think we're on the cusp of seeing a better day for shelter dogs. So we really do encourage, we're sort of pioneering this process, and we really want everybody to join so that we can work it through together for all sizes of shelters.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.